Order. End of question time. Ministerial statement. Minister for Defence.
Mr. Speaker, before I begin my statement, allow me on behalf of all members in this House to offer our deepest condolences to the family of the late Corporal Aloysius Pang. There was an outpouring of sympathy from Singaporeans all across the island on Corporal Pang's passing, as we shared the grief of the family's tragic loss. And I pray that the passage of time will bring some comfort to the Pang family, as well as for the other families affected by the recent deaths of NS men. Your questions today as MPs are an important part of holding MINDEF and the SAF accountable for the safety of our servicemen, and will strengthen our collective resolve to make SAF training as safe as possible and prevent such tragic deaths from occurring again. My statement today will cover three areas. First, the death of Corporal Aloysius Pang. Second, the Committee of Inquiry findings of Corporal Liu Kai. And third, safety enhancements by the SAF following recent NS training deaths. Let me first address questions from MPs on Corporal Pang, who died on 23rd January this year. The Committee of Inquiry has been convened by the Armed Forces Council, AFC, on the 25th of January. All 5 members of the COI are from outside MINDEF and the SAF. They comprise the chairperson, who is a judge nominated by the state courts, a consultant medical specialist, a member nominated by the External Review Panel on SAF Safety, the ERPSS, a member of the Workplace Safety and Health Council, and a senior-ranked national serviceman. The COI has started its investigation to determine the circumstances and contributory factors which led to the demise of Corporal Pang. When completed, the COI will submit its findings to the Armed Forces Council and the ERPSS. The ERPSS will in turn provide its comments on the findings, and both their comments and the findings will be made public. However, as Corporal Pang's death occurred in New Zealand, neither the police force nor the state coroner have jurisdiction for deaths outside Singapore. Investigations to determine any culpability in this case will be left to the SAF Special Investigation Branch, SIB, which has jurisdiction under military law. Based on SIB's investigations, the Chief Military Prosecutor will decide if any servicemen are to be prosecuted for criminal or military offences in a military court. The military court is presided over by the state court judges appointed as presidents of the General Court-Martial. In this statement, I will give as much information as possible without prejudicing the COI and SIB's investigations, whose findings in due course will be authoritative and conclusive. To preserve the integrity of the process, I will only state facts in reply to PQs and consciously not draw any inferences or conclusions on the incident involving Corporal Pang. I ask members of Parliament here to observe the same. We should also be mindful of the need to be sensitive to the family's feelings as we honor the memory of Corporal Pang. With this caveat, let me begin. Corporal Aloysius Pang, aged 28, an armament technician, was participating in exercise Thunder Warrior at Waiouru Training Area in New Zealand this year. On 19 January this year, 3 SAF personnel were in the cabin of the Singapore Self-Propelled Howitzer, SSPH, to carry out repair works on the gun's calibration system for accurate firing. The 3 SAF personnel were Corporal Pang, a regular armament technician holding the rank of ME2, Military Expert 2, with more than 16 years in service, and third, the gun detachment commander, who is a 3rd Sergeant NS-man. Mr. Speaker, I have asked for your permission to display some slides. Can I ask for the first slide to be displayed?
Please proceed.
Thank you. Let me orientate members to, first of all, the cabin of the SSPH. The cabin is 2.3 meters in height, 2.44 meters from front to rear, and 2.64 meters from side to side. That gives you the rough dimensions, the dimensions of the cabin within. The gun barrel, which on the left-hand side of the screen is now in the inclined position and therefore it's lowered in the rear, divides the cabin into two. There is space for the 3 persons within the cabin to occupy positions on either side of the gun, as shown in the diagram, 1, 2, and 3. And looking towards the SSPH from the back, about 1.55 meters on the left side, safe position 1 and 2, and 0.9 meters in width on the right side, safe position 3. These so-called safe positions are designed to be occupied by the driver, the ammo loader, and charge loaders, but for the purpose of the statements, I'll refer to them as safe positions. The gun barrel is usually tilted upwards for firing. That's the picture shown on the top, smaller picture on the left, the gun barrel at the inclined position with the gun pointed up. The gun barrel is usually tilted upwards for firing, but needs to be lowered for some types of maintenance work. When the gun is lowered, the flick rammer at the rear end of the barrel goes up and ends about 10 centimeters below the top rim of the cabin. I'll have some more pictures to make it more clear later. Because of this, no one should be behind the barrel when the gun is being lowered. Unfortunately, Corporal Pang was caught between the gun barrel and the interior of the SSPH as the gun was lowered and sustained compression injuries to his chest and abdomen. After he sustained these injuries, Corporal Pang was treated on site by the SAF medical officer and evacuated to Waiouru Camp Medical Center. He was heli-evacuated to Waikato Hospital in Hamilton, New Zealand, which is a regional trauma center, where surgeons decided that he needed an operation to treat his injuries. Prior to his first injury, Corporal Pang was conscious and speaking. At the first operation, the surgical team found that a number of organs were damaged and treated them accordingly. After the first surgery, Corporal Pang did not require any ventilation and his vital signs were stable. In fact, after the first surgery, he spoke with his mother, who had been flown over to New Zealand. A second look surgery had been planned for Corporal Pang on 21st January 2019, 2 days after the first surgery. According to the surgeons there, this was to detect further injuries, as damage from compression injuries may only show up later. No further damage was discovered at the second look surgery, but despite this, Corporal Pang's condition subsequently deteriorated. Despite being placed on artificial life support and further treatment, Corporal Pang passed away on 23rd January 2019, 4 days after the primary incident in the SSPH. I propose now to deal with MP's questions which fall in 3 broad categories. First, what was the experience and state of the maintenance crew? I have a second slide. Corporal Pang had arrived in New Zealand on 6th January and had begun maintenance work from 10th January. So 6th January he arrived, he began maintenance work 10th January. This was Corporal Pang's 7th in-camp training. He had been trained to perform maintenance and repair for the SSPH since he was a full-time national serviceman. In addition, during his previous ICT's in-camp trainings in February of 2018, he had attended a 2-day refresher maintenance vocation training on the basic functional checks and troubleshooting for the SSPH. That course also included safety procedures during gun movements. Before participating in Exercise Thunder Warrior this year, Corporal Pang had undergone refresher training on maintenance tasks in New Zealand. For this exercise, Corporal Pang was involved in the preparation of more than 10 SSPHs, which included servicing and maintaining of the guns. The other two servicemen were also similarly qualified. The gun commander was in his 8th in-camp training and had undergone refresher training prior to his deployment in the exercise. The regular technician has 8 years of working experience on the SSPH, and it was his 6th time participating as a technician in Exercise Thunder Warrior. Let me explain how maintenance work on the SSPH is conducted when the unit is deployed in the field. There are 2 levels of maintenance support, basic and higher. Basic support is provided by the SSPH Battalion's Organic Forward Maintenance Platoon, made up of NS men, and Corporal Pang was part of this Forward Maintenance Platoon. If the repair works exceed the scope of the Forward Maintenance Platoon, more complex maintenance is requested from and performed by technicians in a higher maintenance echelon, and this is called the Forward Support Group, who are made up of regulars. So basic support, made up of NS men, more complex maintenance made up of regulars in the Forward Support Group. In this particular incident, Corporal Pang was first activated, but as he was unable to resolve the fault, Corporal Pang requested and received the help of regular technicians from the Forward Support Group. Corporal Pang and 1 regular technician of ME2 rank were inside the cabin of the SSPH with the gun commander, a 3rd Sergeant NS-man, when the incident happened. These are the 3 persons I reference in the beginning of my statement. Second, the adequacy of safety protocols and whether the maintenance crew were familiar with them during this ICT. A number of MPs have asked for this. MPs Cheryl Chan, Fatima Latif, Darrow David, Ms. Chen Li Hui, Mr. Dennis Tan, and Joan Pereira. Let me show a 3rd slide. I will focus on the relevant safety instructions during maintenance work, because this is the reason for the presence of these 3 people in the SSPH, and in particular, when the gun is lowered. There are safety procedures taught to all maintenance and SSPH operating crew. The ME2 regular technician is overall in charge, because he comes from the Forward Support Group, and he's in charge of more complex repair work, so he's in charge. For the repair work in this case, the maintenance manual indicates that it is the responsibility of the technician in charge to ensure that the gun has been lowered and fixed in place before any maintenance works can begin. Further, the safety instructions specify safe positions within the SSPH cabin for soldiers to occupy during the gun lowering, as well as safety precautions to be taken. In operations or during maintenance, it is the gun commander who lowers the gun. From his safe position 1, indicated in the middle of this slide, of the picture of the tank with his gun pointing forwards or pointing up. From his safe position 1, he must first check, the gun commander must first check to ensure that the gun barrel area is free from obstacles and that no persons are in the travel path of the barrel. Other persons in the cabin are to occupy safe positions 2 or 3 on the left side and the right side respectively. The gun commander then gives the signal, clear away, to warn the technicians about the barrel movement. He should visually check to ensure that no persons are in the travel path of the barrel and all crew are in the safe positions. After which, the gun commander should shout, "Stand by," before moving the barrel. In the event of any danger, there are also 3 emergency stop buttons in each of the safe positions inside the SSPH, and they're indicated as the red buttons in each of the safe positions. There are 3 of them. In the operator's manual, there is a standard warning, and I quote it. It's boxed in the safety manuals, printed in bold. Quote, "Failure to observe the above warnings may result in serious injury or death to crew," unquote. The warning is repeated for a variety of drills that the SSPH crew must undertake. Next, I will show a video of this safety drill prescribed during the gun lowering, and it will be shown in actual speed. With your permission, Mr. Speaker. It takes about 9 seconds for the gun to be lowered to the horizontal position for maintenance. All 3 persons who were in the cabin in this incident have been trained specifically on the SSPH and had conducted similar maintenance on it in the past. During this exercise, both Corporal Pang and the regular technician had conducted maintenance work on the gun daily. Following the incident, the SAF's immediate task was to ensure that there were no systemic machine malfunction of the SSPH, which would otherwise have put maintenance crews at risk. Inspections of the SSPH have not detected any machine malfunction of the gun lowering mechanism. Third, was there a design flaw of the SSPH? Member Daniel Goh asked this. The SSPH was designed and developed to international military standards for system safety and human factor engineering. And many other militaries operate tracked 155mm guns with similar gun lowering mechanisms. This includes the United States, South Korea, and Germany. The SSPH prototype platform underwent extensive trials and evaluations from year 2000 to 2002 before its introduction in 2003. Over the last 15 years, so it's been in operation for the last 15 years. Over the last 15 years, more than 1,000 national servicemen and regulars have been trained to operate the SSPH, and about 12,500 rounds fired. There has not been any reported injury of servicemen due to the gun lowering for maintenance or operating in or firing the SSPH. I have stated the facts that MINDEF and SAF are aware of in reply to MP's questions. They include Mr. Christopher D'Souza, Mr. Pritam Singh, and Ms. Lee Bee Hua. We must now leave it to the independent 5-member COI led by the State Court judge to determine the factors which led to the death of Corporal Pang. The COI has full access to material and witnesses to determine the facts for themselves. For avoidance of doubt, let me reiterate that the COI need not take into account anything in my statement in Parliament today. Everything asked for by the COI will be released to them. I do not foresee needing to withhold any information for security reasons. The COI will also make specific recommendations to rectify any systemic or human lapses found. In the meantime, the 2 other servicemen deployed have been redeployed from their operational roles. We owe it to Corporal Pang and his family, indeed to all Singaporeans, to get to the bottom of what happened and to make things right to ensure the safety of the NS training system as a whole. I ask that all of us respect these objective and impartial processes that are underway, to reserve our judgment and wait for the conclusions of the COI, which will be presented in Parliament subsequently. Let me now share the COI findings on Corporal Liu, who died on 3rd November 2018 after a Bionics reversed into a Land Rover of which he was the driver. As explained earlier in the House, the COI is enabled and governed by the SAF Act. Its mandate is fact-finding and not to determine culpability of individuals. To determine culpability, separate and independent from the COI, police investigations are ongoing. Thereafter, the Attorney General Chambers will decide if any persons should be prosecuted. Internally, MINDEF will conduct its own investigations and may charge persons who breach military law in the military court, even if the AGC does not file criminal charges. The COI of Corporal Liu Kai will take into account findings from these various judicial processes before finalizing his report. On 3rd November 2018, the 42nd Battalion Singapore Armoured Regiment, 42 SAR, was conducting a two-sided company mission exercise at the Jalan Murai training area. As with all such exercises, a regular trainer of captain rank from the Active Unit Training Center was assigned to evaluate the exercise troops. The trainer used a Land Rover whose driver was Corporal Liu, a transport operator. Let me orientate members to the Bionics crew. This is the Bionics, and the crew comprises 4 persons. For this particular incident, a full-time national serviceman who was in the position of the vehicle commander, a second lieutenant, a rear guide. When the vehicle reverses, he was a 3rd Sergeant NS-man, the driver, and a gunner, who were both corporals. The COI determined that the servicemen who were involved were qualified to participate in the exercise, having undergone the requisite training for their roles. On 2nd November 2018, the trainer met the Bionics vehicle commander to understand their maneuver plan for the next day's exercise. The COI was of the view that the servicemen involved had had their rests in accordance to the Training Safety Regulations, our TSR, and that their mental and physical states were fit for participation in the activity and did not appear to have an effect on their attention to safety protocols. The COI also found that the Land Rover that Corporal Liu was driving was serviceable. The Land Rover has 2 cameras, one that records events in front of the vehicle, and the second that records events inside the cabin of the Land Rover. The COI was able to piece together a detailed chronology from these camera recordings and statements from multiple witnesses. I will bring members through the events in detail by showing a series of graphics. The exercise started on the morning of 3rd November 2018 at 7 o'clock. Corporal Liu and the trainer were in the Land Rover following their assigned Bionics. At around 9:58, the Bionics crew spotted several vehicles passing by at the junction ahead of it and stopped the Bionics as ordered by the vehicle commander. Responding to this, the Land Rover, driven by Corporal Liu, also stopped. The COI found that the trainer had instructed Corporal Liu to move the Land Rover forward to overtake the Bionics. Just as Corporal Liu started to move forward slowly, shots were fired as part of the exercise. Upon hearing the gunshots, Corporal Liu stopped the Land Rover behind the Bionics, and based on the COI's calculations, this final position of the Land Rover would have been at a distance of, quote, at most 19.8 meters from the Bionics, but short of the safety distance of 30 meters stated in the training and safety regulations, unquote. 4 seconds after the Land Rover had stopped, the Bionics started to reverse as part of the extrication drill ordered by the Bionics vehicle commander in responding to the shots. Let me explain a little bit about extrication drills. How well and quickly armor combat crews can extricate themselves when fired upon, can make a big difference as to whether they survive an enemy onslaught or are captured or destroyed. The COI acknowledged the need for this type of training, even though it is high risk. The bionics, as part of the prescribed drill, had to reverse so that its guns could continue to fire forward at the enemy. As the driver of the bionics is unable to see behind him or behind the vehicle, the rear guide directs the driver in reversing the vehicle. You remember the picture I showed of the bionics with the driver in front and he can see forward. It is the rear guide who must guide him in reversing. As the bionics reverse, the Land Rover was initially not in its path. The COI found that the bionics had drifted in reversing and the driver made a slight steer to correct this drift. The steer brought the Land Rover into the path of the bionics. The COI did not find any mechanical problems with the bionics' steering equipment. Almost immediately after the bionics started reversing, the video recordings from the Land Rover's front-facing camera show the third sergeant rear guide of the bionics, quote, gesturing at the Land Rover to move away and then pushing the mic of his helmet closer to his mouth, unquote. The COI found that the rear guide issued stop commands into the intercom of his helmet set when the bionic started reversing and did so repeatedly. The intercom of the helmet is the rear guide's only means of communication with the other crew members in the bionics. However, the bionics continued to reverse. The video recording of the interior of the Land Rover cabin showed the captain trainer tapping Corporal Liu and signaling him to reverse the Land Rover. From the beeping sounds, it also indicated that Corporal Liu did engage the reverse gear. Both the trainer and Corporal Liu also shouted and gestured with their hands for the bionics to stop, and the trainer also attempted to reach for the handset of the radio set to communicate with the bionics crew. Approximately 8 seconds after they started reversing, the bionics collided into the Land Rover and mounted the driver's side before coming to a stop. The trainer could extricate himself, but Corporal Liu remained trapped. The trainer notified the conducting officer of the exercise, who immediately ordered the exercise to cease. A medic on board a nearby bionics immediately tended to Corporal Liu. The SAF emergency ambulance service, the unit medical officer, and the Singapore Civil Defence Force were activated and arrived on site. Unfortunately, Corporal Liu succumbed to his injuries. He was pronounced dead by the unit medical officer on site at around 10:35 hours. The cause of his death, as determined by the post-mortem, was traumatic asphyxia. The COI noted that the rear guide had repeatedly given an order for the driver to stop reversing through the intercom via his helmet. The COI noted that the intercom system was working earlier in the exercise. The COI has asked for an independent technical assessment and a report on whether the intercom system was working properly all the time. In parallel, police investigations too are also focused on the communications between the bionics crew and whether this was affected by the equipment. This is, of course, an important point that needs to be resolved, but we will have to await the outcome of the police investigations. The COI made several findings in their report. First, the COI noted that ensuring the safety distance is the responsibility of the vehicle commander of the Land Rover. In this case, the Land Rover ended up in a position that was less than the required safety distance from the bionics. Second, the reversing of the bionics from the simulated enemy encounter brought the Land Rover into the path of the bionics. The COI found that a safety management plan was included as part of the exercise and in line with standard practice. The COI also found there was adequate deployment of medics and medical equipment as part of this plan for medical response. I now share the External Review Panel on Safety's written report on the COI findings, and it will be distributed to members with the Speaker's permission and be made public subsequently. To summarize the report, they agreed with the COI's findings on the incident and proposed improvements that could be made to the safety management, emergency response system, and combat vehicle safety. And the details are in the report. Much of what the ERPSS commented, I have already outlined in my ministerial statement. It will be now up to the AGC to decide if there are grounds to prosecute any person in the criminal courts for the death of Corporal Liu Kai. If no criminal charges are filed, MINDEF will take disciplinary measures for lapses identified in this incident in our military court. And we will update members and the public on these disciplinary measures. In the meantime, the servicemen involved in this incident have been redeployed to non-operational roles. Mr. Speaker, Corporal Liu Kai was a well-liked and respected soldier. He served with pride and was remembered by his peers for his dedication and commitment. We mourn the loss of this precious son, and we hope that the measures that the SAF has put in place will prevent a similar incident in the future. And these are questions that members have asked, including Mr. Desmond Chu. In response to the COI's findings and its own internal review, the following measures have or will be put in place by the SAF. First, in addition to the existing emergency horn activation button in front for the vehicle commander of the Bionics, 2 more emergency horn buttons have been installed in the rear of all Bionics vehicles used for training. So before this incident, there was 1 in front. Now 2 more have been put in the rear of the Bionics for training vehicles. This is to sound the alarm in the event of an intercom failure. Second, from March this year, rear view cameras will be progressively installed into our training fleet of Bionics vehicles so that the driver can see during reversing. The Army will study if these new features, the safety horns and the camera, rear view camera, ought to be incorporated for operational vehicles as well. All heavy-wheeled vehicles, such as 5-tonners, will also be progressively installed with rear-view cameras and mirrors to reduce blind spots. Third, as with live-firing exercises, the Army will now conduct safety tabletop exercises for all high-risk non-live-firing exercises before the actual execution. I think some members asked about this. This includes familiarization with emergency measures and evacuation plans. Fourth, more experienced regulars have been added as trainers. Fifth, starting from March this year, medics will upgrade their skills in resuscitation and handling of emergencies through attachments to hospital emergency departments or ambulances. Sixth, vehicle and equipment serviceability will be improved based on the recommendations of the external panel. Finally, with regard to the safety distance between vehicles. In an exercise area, vehicles are used for a variety of administrative, safety and training purposes. The current distance of 30 meters was prescribed after evaluation and tests, and in general assessed to be adequate for safety and still allow supporting elements to be responsive to events on the ground. But where vehicles have to reverse, such as in extrication drills, the Army has put in new measures to enhance safety. First, trainers will no longer travel in Land Rovers, but will join exercise troops in the combat vehicles during high-risk training. Second, for all reversing maneuvers, including extrication drills, the driver can only move the vehicle backwards with the explicit clearance of the rear guide. These 2 measures, together with the extra emergency horn buttons, will enhance safety and still allow our armor units to practice extrication drills. Further, the Army will ensure that only essential vehicles are allowed into the exercise area to minimize the risk of accidents. Apart from these specific measures, in response to the recent NS deaths, the SAF has decided that for the safety system as a whole, a dedicated unit will be set up at the highest level to drive and supervise the safety culture and enforcement against slack practices. This move also responds to ERPSS's finding that while safety policies and management systems of the SAF are largely in place, there was a need for more compliance checks and ground-level audits. In line with this objective, the SAF will undertake the following systemic measures. The current Safety and Systems Review Directorate, SSRD, will be expanded and elevated to an Inspector General Office under the Chief of Defence Force to oversee all services. The office will be headed by the SAF Inspector General. The Chief of Staff Joint Staff, which is an existing appointment of a service chief equivalent, will concurrently be the Inspector General. This dual function is synergistic as the COSJS has an overview of all operations, and as Inspector General will have the authority to ensure that safety-first habits and processes are incorporated at all levels of training. More safety officers will be deployed to assist individual units and supervise training activities. There will be more safety audits of units by the inspection teams in the services and supervised by the Inspector General's office. Second, commanders of units which do not meet standards and have committed lapses in safety procedures and processes will have this marked against them in their performance reviews. Let me emphasize that such commanders will be deemed to have performed unsatisfactorily even if accidents have not occurred. This is the right emphasis to prevent accidents. In the past few weeks, the Chief of Defence Force reduced the tempo for every unit to review its processes and to emphasize to the troops a safety consciousness to protect themselves and their buddies. Units that are on live operations, such as those protecting key installations, are not affected by this measure and will continue to be vigilant. Basic types of training have resumed since February the 7th. Individual units will continue to be audited and will resume realistic training when safety processes are assessed to be in place. Some MPs, Darrell David, Mr. Chong Ki-Hiong, Mr. Leon Pereira, have asked if external agencies review our system to detect root issues. The ERPSS, which consists of prominent safety experts and professionals outside the SAF, is tasked primarily with this mission. The SAF safety system is aligned to international frameworks and regulations, such as the Occupational Health and Safety System Framework. It comprises rules that mitigate safety risks in the conduct of our training processes and training to build up competency of our servicemen and to make sure that rules are properly applied, inspections and reporting, mechanisms to ensure that rules are followed, and consequences if they are not followed. Quite a few MPs, Ms. Fatima Latif, Ms. Cheng Li Hui, Ms. Joan Pereira, Ms. Cheryl Chan, have asked if even if the safety instructions are adequate and in place, how do we ensure that NS-men are familiar and safety conscious? It's an important question. And also, if the SAF has taken into account the abrupt switch from civilian environment to military training where there are much larger and potentially dangerous equipment. Another good question. These are important issues that need to be factored into our safety systems. One suggestion has been to outsource all maintenance work with heavy vehicles or machinery. This is not possible. Complex maintenance tasks that require specialized tools and equipment are already outsourced, but we still need national servicemen technicians to be with their units to perform basic maintenance so that the equipment can function during operations. We do cater time for NS-men soldiers to adjust from the civilian settings. Before any activity commences, a safety brief is held and inspections conducted to check that soldiers are in good physical state and that vehicles and equipment are serviceable. Soldiers must also complete an individual risk assessment checklist and raise safety concerns to their superiors for mitigation before any activity begins. NS training is conducted progressively, starting with refresher training for individual skills and proficiencies before any operations are conducted. And prior to their deployment, further training such as with a simulator is conducted. I think one of our MPs asked about this. The Inspector General Office will review if further mitigating measures are needed to help NS-men adjust from civilian life to in-camp training. MPs have asked, and this includes a question from a Member of Parliament, Lee Bee Hua, if we punish safety lapses, even when they do not lead to injury. Over the past 3 years, an average of 2% of servicemen a year was punished under the SAF Act for safety lapses, 2%. Their punishments range from a fine to detention and administrative penalties, such as delays in promotion and reduction in benefits. At the same time, we reward servicemen who demonstrate safe behavior. Units and individuals are recognized during the service's respective annual safety day. Member Muhammad Arshad inquired about this. If we are to achieve 0 fatalities during NS training, we must have a strong safety culture in all our units and safety consciousness down to the last soldier. Commanders and supervisors must lead by example to emphasize safety, and all commanders undergo safety training and must know that safety lapses will affect their performance review. Safety officers, who are former senior commanders, help ensure the safe conduct of training. Experienced regular trainers partner the NS men commanders to design training and safety plans. Soldiers must have a strong respect for safety rules, take care of one another, and speak out on safety concerns. Incentives and disincentives must be aligned to achieve the right safety outcomes. Our safety system must weed out unsafe practices even when they do not lead to accidents. And this was a point, I think, in the question of Member Irene Quay. Individual soldiers are encouraged to report unsafe practices and risky behavior to their superiors without fear of reprisals or regardless of rank, to call for an immediate stop to training. We do not reward, nor should signal that we reward, adventurous behavior. And this is in the training safety regulations. And let me quote it in full. It's in Chapter 1, Section 2, Paragraph 1, Paragraph 11. Quote, anyone who spots a safety breach or unsafe practice can call for an immediate stop to it, rectify when possible, and report to the conducting officer. Once notified, the conducting officer should verify the report and, when necessary, rectify the safety breach or unsafe practices. The conducting officer must update the supervising officer on the measures taken to rectify the safety breach or unsafe practice, unquote. Anyone who spots a safety breach, not only commanders, anyone. Servicemen can also report safety incidents and near misses through a 24-hour safety hotline. And this safety hotline receives about 140 calls a year. Ultimately, safety is both a command and individual responsibility. And everyone needs to play their part because precious lives depend on it. It is not true that we cannot train safely if we want to train realistically. If we have a strong safety culture and safety systems, it will give soldiers greater confidence to train hard and realistically. SAF commanders are convinced that it can be done, and these measures I have outlined today will lead us to that goal of 0 training fatalities. Mr. Speaker, the loss of any soldier is devastating. It leaves a void that cannot be filled in the lives of family members and friends, and its impact is deep and far-reaching. It will take much time for their grief to run its course. Members Anthea Ong, Mr. Chong Ki-hyong have asked about assistance when a death occurs. Within the SAF, dedicated grief counselors are assigned to provide support to the servicemen's family members in the aftermath of their loss. For our soldiers, a team of psychologists, counselors, and psychiatrists are deployed to assist unit commanders and servicemen in their recovery from the stress in such incidents. MINDEF does take the family's request into consideration when deploying a deceased serviceman's immediate family members during their NS. Over the past 17 months, 4 national servicemen have passed away during training. In 2012, the SAF also experienced 4 training fatalities that year. But from 2013 to 2016, we had none. How did this turnaround occur? This was probably due to multiple factors, but I think the new safety measures we put into place after the devastating incidents of 2012 had an effect. If we put our minds and efforts to achieve zero training fatalities, it can be achieved. 4 families have experienced much sorrow after their irreplaceable loss these past months. Singapore has lost precious sons. As deep as the hurt, as great the loss, we must not forget why we suffer them. When the founding generation pledged themselves to build a strong SAF, they were fully conscious that a strong military is only possible with fully committed NS men drawn from every family in Singapore. They knew the cost, they knew the sacrifice that would be required, not only in resources that we invest in every budget, but much more precious will be the time, the sweat, the tears, even the lives of precious sons. Inherently, military training poses risk. On any given day within the SAF, thousands of NS men train hard amid moving tons of steel, bullets, munitions, and other explosives. Why do our NS men do it? They do it to protect Singapore. Because without NS men, we cannot have an SAF or the home team that can deter terrorists from attacking Changi Airport or Jurong, or harming innocent civilians in shopping malls and crowded places. Without the NS men and the SAF, potential aggressors will not shy away from simply marching into and occupying today's affluent Singapore as Iraq did to Kuwait. Without a strong defense, our air and shipping routes in and out of Singapore could easily be blocked, as Qatar now faces. These are not imaginary security threats that our NS men train for, but real. They have happened elsewhere and can occur to Singapore too. We must never give up on national service that forms the backbone of our SAF for national defense. This imperative of national service and our national defense does not absolve or reduce the accountability of MINDEF and SAF in any way to ensure safe training. On the contrary, it compels MINDEF and the SAF to do all that is humanly possible to prevent training deaths for NS men, because precious sons have been entrusted to us by their families. MINDEF and the SAF will hold ourselves accountable for every single NS man entrusted to us. I am deeply sorry for the loss of 4 precious NS men in the last 17 months. The NSF will strengthen, the SAF will strengthen its safety systems. Even as we honor those who died in service of our country, we must soldier on to build a strong defense, to protect Singapore, and to protect every NS man during training. Thank you, Speaker.